Well, not really manuhiri, you Tom. The presentation from the Introduction to the Future Farming Trust, Tom Belford and
I'm John Van der Linden.
John, oh, that's a hard name to say. But like our Maori say names, eh? Van der Linden. Okay. So we just try and keep it down to about 15 minutes if possible, so we can get some.
I'm yielding my time to the chairman.
Shall I start?
Yep.
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation to the Regional Council Maori Committee, and I'm John Van der Linden, the chair of the Future Farming Trust. I have with me Tom Belford, and one of the I just thought I'd introduce the other members on this little card that you have. Is also a list of the other members of the trust. So they include Philip Schofield, who's the vice chair, Scott Lawson, the treasurer, Liz Crouchek, Tom, who we've got here, Greg Hart, and Will Foley, who's on the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So currently we've got seven trustees. Of those, we've got 4 current farmers and 3 current or ex-growers and 3 actively serving the primary industry. So that, I know they don't add up to 7, but we've got sort of people that sort of dovetail into more than one role. I think one of the things I think if you look at the vision, one of the things that we've identified is that we want to make Hawke's Bay farming the pride of our entire community. Farming's had a little bit of a bad rap, for some of the environmental issues that go on, and one of the things that we want to do in our mission is what we want to promote, inspire and celebrate profitable farming systems that enrich the environment and the community. So it's not all about profit, it's about being profitable, but it's actually about looking after our land, our environment, and looking after the community and engaging with the community more and more. So with that in mind, one of the things that we want to do is drive positive future change. We want to tell those, there's different ways that we want to do that. Some of it's just capturing the good news stories that people are already doing positive things in their farming systems, and so we want to tell those stories. However, we also want to look at a longer term future. We very much like the principles of regenerative farming, because we think that a lot of those principles make a lot of sense in terms of being sustainable going forward. And so with that in mind, what we've done is we've got a couple of projects on that are looking at 10 farms around Hawke's Bay, and we are looking at what they currently do and what they can do, and sort of guiding. And one of the things we want to do is gather evidence, because there's a lot of thought out there that if you do things right by the environment, you're not profitable. And you can be both profitable and environmentally friendly. And one of the other big things I think that a lot of organisations drive productivity, and maximum productivity is not necessarily maximum profitability. So one of the things that we've got a guy, Barry Riddler, who has his own, it's called E2M, economic environment model, and it looks at the inputs, and it sort of steers the farmers into how to adjust their management so that they're both profitable and environmentally friendly. So that's a project that's going to take probably a number of years to do, but and what we want to do is gather the evidence to show that that's actually a viable future farming system. But we also want to capture those good news stories that other people are doing along the way and communicate those, so that, for example, growers, they can use water more effectively. I think, that's really, I mean, a lot of our work is, and most of the trustees are very, very strong in the belief that our soil is our key to our production systems. If we look after our soil and we have a nice healthy soil, then the plants will be healthy, then the people will be healthy as well. So, we're talking about looking after our environment. And with that, we're sort of looking at ways that we can build carbon in the soil. Potentially that will be able to be offset against future carbon credits in the future, we hope. But that may be some years down the track. Is there anything you want to add, Tom, about...
We are focused on change. As you all well know, we've come through a period where what has been in the headlines a great deal is drought in Hawke's Bay. This regional council is very focused at this point on water security, issues of resilience around climate change and so forth. And I think a key tenet really of our philosophy is that there are available land use practices today that, if more widely employed, would help address those core issues. And while there were certainly folks who suffered, sheep and beef farmers in particular, through the drought window, there were others in the same region who did quite well, thank you, who had effective farming practices, who made money and came through relatively unscathed. So what's the difference? And you can move around the district and see, on one side of the road, a bleached out, burnt out set of pastures, and on the other side of the road you can see green grass and healthy animals. What's the difference? What's going on there? And so the buzzword these days seems to be regenerative agriculture, but setting that label aside, what it actually covers are some pretty fundamental principles around how you manage your soil, how you manage animals on the soil, and so forth, and which at face don't seem to be rocket science. They seem to be very practical things that certainly I would suspect a fair number of Maori farmers have incorporated into their practice for a long time, by whatever name. So I think we have seven trustees who are on the same page with respect to that, and that's the message we want to get out broadly into the community. We think we know how to do that reasonably well with the Pakeha farming community, and there are networks out there, there are communication networks, there are organizations, there are farmer collectives, there are catchment groups, there are a variety of ways to reach out to that community, but within the Maori farming community you have a very, very distributed, non-organized set of players, and we're frankly here to say, look, here's what we would like to accomplish. We need to find ways to engage with your landowners around these kinds of principles, and so we're looking for, over time, some guidance in that respect as to how to go about that. John mentioned this one project where we're putting somebody on the ground in 10 different farms to really take a bottom-up look at everything they do at our expense, and all we're looking for from the farmer is shared information and an attitude to make change if we produce some results that say, well, why don't you try this or why don't you try that? He's not coming in to sell any particular answer, but just to help people get a much more holistic view of what they're doing on their land, what inputs are they using, what inputs might they be better off without, that sort of thing. And so this is just day one of the conversation, really, with your community as to how we might engage in that process.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you. One thing, a couple of questions. Where are the 10 farms? And this sounds like a solution that's good for the environment. This is good. And I suppose in the Wairoa area, Katarina, the Māori land blocks and the corporations there, it's about introducing you to our people and getting in front of them. But it's really interesting to hear, like, I know you presented at the regional council, but you said there was on one side of the road, they were bleached out and dry and cracked earth, and the other one was thriving. So there's the solution, the solution. So we really want to hear it. And if you don't know what regenerative farming is, look on YouTube or look it up.
Absolutely.
It sounds fantastic.
Absolutely.
And I suppose just in relation to an engagement with Māori, it'll be like we have a big discussion this morning about Te Mana Tō and then I know with the Māori farmers that we work, obviously that will feature in our kōrero and treaty settlement groups as they buy more farms and become more active in that space. Those same principles and values will go through it. Fingers crossed into their farming practice. So I suppose, and it's good to make you aware because obviously we're having a discussion about Te Mana Tō and the framework and that's most probably around those environmental factors you alluded to because that'll feature, maybe in the next 100 years for Māori and good farming practice. So it'd be good for yourselves, I suppose, to look at that and then how that's potentially framed up and the values and that because it is important for Māori. I think we've all just said that this morning. Hey, just good to give you a heads up where we're heading in those conversations.
Yeah. Kia ora for that, John and Tom. I'm a former director of the Federation of Māori Authorities for Tāki Timu. So there is a federation that has a membership specifically around sheep, beef and horticulture and those sorts of things, all the membership. Tracy, Haupapa. She's the current chairperson. And of course, trying to, and part of that association, of course, is that you pay a fee into the association. And for some of the farmers, they cannot afford it. Only these big corporations in Pāhauwera can and whakaki. So I don't mind forwarding any of that detail too. So just bear in mind, and of course this Tāki Timu region, and probably a question, is it just for the Hawke's Bay region that this farming? Okay. I know there's a concentration of those farms that are more in Wairoa, as I say, from Mohaka, Nuhaka, and they tend to actually join up with the Tairāwhiti folk, but they're definitely from, the Wharirātas back this way, kind of in the Nuhaka down into the Mohaka area. So that might be a good place to get, I'll try and forward that information on to you. Once we get it. But great regenerative, I think it's fantastic in terms of the notwithstanding the dire situation that's impacting on farming overall, but more importantly, how this type of concept and kaupapa has been really good to see kind of pick up its momentum over the last few years, and it's realised itself with people around the table such as yourselves, based on those principles. So great. Kia ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora korua, thanks for coming back in, and I think just listening to you again, it just reinforces how supportive I am of what you're trying to do and what you're currently doing. And like a lot of us, we're constrained to 3 yearly funding rounds. So when we look at the next long-term plan, just maybe giving me a timeline of sort of where you're at with the economic and environmental assessment and the soil carbon assessment, just so that we have a good idea for the long-term plan coming up, how we can support you even further to do that.
Thank you.
I mean, right now, these are two toe-in-the-water projects that we have underway. In the one case, there's a farmer by the name of John Camp, Toka, who's has 3 properties that he's migrating in the direction of organic dairying, and so he's very soil health focused and soil carbon focused, and so what we're supporting there is a much more rigorous measurement of what is happening to soil carbon levels over time on that property. So that's it has to be done over a long period of time, but we're doing it with a great deal of precision, in part because the practices we're talking about here have been embraced more overseas, and therefore when you talk about them here, a lot of the establishment dismisses it all. Says, it's irrelevant what works in Iowa or Australia or whatever. What we're doing has to be fit for purpose here on our soils and our da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, when you get behind it and look at what the principles are, come on, these are principles that apply everywhere. But John used the word evidence a number of times in his comments, and that's what we feel we have to produce. We are Hawke's Bay focused. We want to produce this evidence and the stories around them out of Hawke's Bay. And we're totally focused on what's happening on farm. So other parts of the stream, ag business and downstream employment training, that sort of thing is not really our brief. We're trying to lift the game on the farm. And so from a long-term planning standpoint, the measuring and monitoring that we have to do has to be sustained. It has to be sustainable. The council has asked us to be funding. That's probably not realistic.
No rate increase, Tom.
But it is this is obviously a long-term proposition. And we are going out to other money sources, as you would expect us to, MPI and elsewhere, to get others involved, Beef and Lamb and the other organizations that are active. So we're not doing this in a silo, but we felt we have to get some actual projects underway to have some credibility with those other players as we go out. And we've been given enough funding by the council. We're in this middle of our second year of funding, and we have not spent but probably $100,000.
Oh yeah, not
if that. So we have some money to spend, and we can spend money.
Well, that's 100,000. That's all it needs. Obviously, we've over budgeted you guys.
What's your success rate?
It's a bit hard to actually give you what we've done as a trust is we've said, look, 75% of our effort and our resource is going towards this sort of future farming state, like call it regen farming. 25% of the resource is going to capture some of the good news stories that are happening now. For example, I think when I spoke to the council, I talked about a project I was involved with, which was looking at the way we use water and rescheduling, looking at the way we schedule water in horticulture. So we did a little project there, not only looking at by measuring what the plants actually use rather than what the soil has, and not only that, but the way we apply water. So instead of putting it on the ground and it evaporates off and then feeds the weeds and then finally gets down into the roots, we looked at subsurface irrigation. So the combination of that, we saved 80% of the water we would normally use. And so it's telling those little good news stories as well. So that's 25% of our resource is going to tell those good news stories. And excuse me a sec, but I'd just like to pick up on one word Tom said, which is resilience. And if you look at, we've just been through a huge drought. And so a lot of farmers' approach to a drought is that we need an irrigation supply, and we need to, instead of, we didn't get that much rainfall, so we're going to actually take water, that we store it, and then we're going to apply it to our land. Now that's okay, but that should be something that's done further downstream. If we build our soil structure and our soil depth, then what we're doing and adding carbon into our soil, and with diversity of plants and animals, then what we're doing is we're holding this big soil reservoir which actually holds more water. And so those farms that Tom talked about, and two of the trustees, Greg Hart and Will Foley, they're both using these principles, and their farms were lovely and green, and then farms next door were burnt off, just because they're following these principles which make a lot of sense. So there's good success out there, but what we have to do, it's interesting that the critics of regen farming on one side they say, oh no, that's being done overseas and it's not applicable to New Zealand, in particular Hawke's Bay. But then on the other side they say, oh, we're actually already doing some of these things anyway, and a lot of them are, but they're just not doing them to the level they need to be doing them. So you know, we're very confident, but what we've got to do is provide the evidence that you know it's both profitable and environmentally sustainable, because at the moment, immediately you mention that word, regen farming, you polarise people when you have the people that love it and the people that just switch off from it. So, yeah.
And just supplementary. So I think we can accept that the status quo is not sustainable. And just touching on what you last said about the attitude change or the behavioural change, and going to your notes, you had 300 farmers attend a regen farming seminar, yes, or 2 seminars. So what were your impressions of some of the industry that were there? Were they excited about the change? Were they interested in changing things, you know, a practice at a time? What was your feeling from that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what's happened is there was almost, the drought was almost a catalyst to say, well, what we're doing isn't working and there is a better way. And, you know, the people that we had, I think Peter Barrett and John O'Frew, who presented, I think Peter Barrett was, he was on Country Calendar recently, and, you know, that he showed what can be achieved. The issue really is you can't turn a switch from conventional farming to regen farming overnight. It's going to take time, and so one of the things we want to do is show the long term, which could be 3 years out, show what can be achieved, but then also give the little steps along the way. So we just did a grazing management workshop in Central Hawke's Bay as well, to give people the tools, because they'll need to build up their skill level to actually be able to get to that point. But it's neat them seeing what can be done, and I think there's a lot of excitement and a lot of enthusiasm out there for that.
So I think if you held a workshop on grazing practices, you would not think that armies of people are going to turn up to, but we've had very successful, I mean, people are showing up at these things, and so there is an appetite. There's a lot of it is probably still cautious curiosity more than, you know, I'm ready to, you know, jump on the bandwagon here, but they're coming out and they're getting this message, and it's hard to deny the visible differences that people can see out there in these different practices and what they yield.
And a common practice back at home is if you win the Farmer of the Year competition, then they'll take notice of how you're operating. Which I guess a bit similar to Paora, is that we had in the uptake from the Wairoa fraternity.
Oh, well.
No, from Wairoa district farmers, I guess.
Is the trust we're going to be working with, hopefully? There?
Quite a few Maori stations and corporations.
Oh, I'll have to look back through my notes.
Well, back in the 50s or 60s, they had a Te Aranga Trust, which was set up by Centurion Carroll, and it was really about scale of operations, I suppose, to buy stock and buy equipment and stuff. But nowadays, they have the Te Aranga stations, I guess, Maori corporations, and they get together for best practice. Their managers all come together and they talk about all the farming practices and how they're winning or not. And there's quite a lot of Maori corporations in one. They own a lot of land too, so I might pay to try and get in touch with one of them.
Actually, one of the, we just had a meeting last week with Sue Wilson from the East Coast Farming Expo. And so one of the things we're probably going to be doing there is, we've still got to come up at our meeting, but how we support or have a presence there, which is held in Wairoa. So, you know, it's, I mean, the trust encompasses all of Hawke's Bay. So, you know.
Yeah, but if you don't go up there and talk to people, they ain't going to reach them.
I think our feeling at the moment is we need a roadmap that
A map to get to Wairoa.
we need literally a map on
I get lost in it.
As we know, Wairoa's at the end of the world. Go north.
only one road. You hear all sorts of different things have happened over time. So Nikki buys a station down in Parangahau. What's happened? There are a lot of things that we need to get a better feel for as a trust as to I've seen just in the last few months a variety of government grants come through to Maori organizations that seem to be related to lifting the bar farming wise. What's that all about? There's a variety of things happening, but there's no federated farmers that clearly can say here's our 500 members that we can go out and immediately contact. Beef and lamb, which would be talking to all the Pakia sheep and beef folks, would probably have very little penetration in the Maori community. And so we're kind of feeling like we literally might want to get somebody to stand at a map and tell us, here's what's going on. Here are the 20 most significant farming operations in Hawke's Bay. Because we have to look at where could we have the most leverage in terms of making change and having people who are as enthusiastic about making change as we are. So we're not really interested in trying to convert people who are absolute heathens. We're looking for a coalition of the willing. And so we want to identify people who are serious about changing what they're doing. And we help identify who they are.
So you look for the choir. She might be able to find them.
I'm conscious of time too, because we've got to go onto the chart and it's going to take
it's going to take a while. Just Katarina, just that wider contact with the
Thank you.
corporation.
Thank you for coming in today. I'm from Waido. Look, if you wanted a bit of a crash course into Waido and to meet some of the Maori incorporations there, I belong to one of the largest ones in New Zealand, and it's in the Rikuturi Valley. And we just had a committee management AGM last Friday, and I sort of stood up and wore my tai-ao hat, my environmental hat, and posed the question about greenhouse gases and have you got a biodiversity plan and when are you going to rest some of the hills, and we counted so many cows on the hill, almost tipping into the what's your response? So if you really wanted, to me they're quite hard on listening and changing. They're really old school. They will cut down the rewa in favour of clover. So if you like to come and meet some real hard farmers, we try to give them a crack. Because whilst we're doing band-aid things down the bottom of the awa, they're the biggest polluters on our awa. And some of our farms, I hate to say it, but I'm putting it there. I'd love to invite you to Warrell to try and break the ice. And there is one farm that I want to speak about. It's called Waiparere. It's been turned into a Kiwi2 Covenant farm. The Snelling family, brilliant role models right in the middle, and all these incorporations around them watching. So it'd be nice to have some other people come along and teach regenerative farming.
I think one of the questions
Give you my phone number.
was where are the farms, and that was one area we identified we'd like to have a presence with one of these 10 farms. Yeah.
Cool. We'll just have to connect everybody. I'm just mindful of our time. Let's have to move on. But thank you very much for your report. And if I could get someone to move the Future Farming Trust report. Please, Hene Wai, no seconder. Paora, all in favour? Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Now we're just going to go a bit backwards, but forwards, because it's the Māori Committee Terms of Reference. Charter and work program. So that's item 8. So I'll take it as read. Peter,
Yeah,
Would you like to?
I see my two colleagues have both departed. Oh no, I see one have returned. Where's he gone?
I think just went.
Oh.
It's a bit cold over there.
Yeah, and maybe if I just sum up, we're tasked with looking at changing or looking at doing a draft. So it's a draft document for discussion. I'll just take that everyone's been reading through it, and so we came up with some options to look at around how and it's not the be all end all document. You know, I mean, I don't say, but we've had an attempt at trying to draft up something that may take us forward into the future. Oh, Uppy, we're just talking about the charter. So when you read through that, and around purpose, so we talked about the purpose, and I suppose what gives us, I suppose as a Māori committee and before us, our whānau that were here before, it's around the Te Tiriti, and that provided them, or our past members, with the opportunity to engage. So I suppose, and the Te Tiriti does not go away. No, it's here forever. So when we're looking at a document that will take us forward, if we refer back to that, then that's what we've tried to encapsulate it with throughout the charter. So that's there for discussion, and people might have, it's not a be all end all, you know, it's open for change, but it was just to allow in the time frame, because I know we were under a time frame to get that document together, so we thought we'd just put that together, bring back to the committee, and then obviously you could dissect it, or if you want to make changes, that's up to the committee to do. But the intent was to try and put us in another light moving forward, and then future-proof us for the future. But as you heard from James and Rick this morning, things changing constantly, so it may be potentially may meet our need now, but next year for these changes we may have to review it again. So a review process within in our charter, I think, would have to undertake that. So that's just a quick synopsis. We've done it actually quite fast. I think we've done over about a couple of meetings, which is really good, just to get that out. So yeah, obviously I don't know how you want to go through it, but obviously you've got it in front of yourselves, and we cut some things out, and it came up in the corridor how this morning around how the tai whenua go through their selection process is up to the tai whenua to decide. It's not up to anyone else, so it gave them that autonomy to make their selections and move within their own environment, and I think that as a committee we've got to respect our tai whenua are big enough and old enough and mature enough to make their own decisions. We don't need to make their decisions for them. Okay. And that was around the proxy, and we had an example this morning how potentially how that proxy system could be more effective in engaging. And just around the purpose and activities, and there's a bit about our work program, how the co-design and working across the different streams, I suppose, and work teams and the operational plans. We put a little bit of corridor in there. So obviously there's a full document, but that's just a quick brief. Kia ora. Do you want to add anything?
And like I said earlier this morning, I learnt a new word, wordsmithing. And you know, and so the other day I looked at the first line. I thought, oh my God, yeah, the principle I know is PLE, but then operational lies. And I thought about that, and the more I thought about te tēnā, and I think maybe something like adhere to, and it's got to be Treaty of Waitangi Partnership, not and. There's also going to be capital, my dear. Okay, Treaty of Waitangi Partnership. That's got to be specific. Specific. Okay, so there's a bit of that to be done, until we're happy with it. Pete.
Yeah. And it's good intent, I mean, because we're working in partnership with the regional council. We know they've got a job to do, so do we as leaders within our own tai whenua. We need to be there for our whānau. And like the kōrero said this morning about us being passionate, we're passionate for our whānau. Hey, and then sometimes we don't always agree, but that's kei te pai. Hey, that's just how relationships and partnerships are formed. Exactly. So that's so the intent is to work together in partnership and good faith. I think we had that at the summary point at the end.
Kia ora tātou. On behalf of James, who's over here, perhaps I can provide a pathway forward for this.
First and foremost is to acknowledge the Maori Committee, all of the Maori Committee, and in particular your delegation to the subcommittee to go into wānanga mode. And as I understand it, because I wasn't there, but I know the two ladies behind us there, one or both were there, and they were watching Ki Ngā Wera Wera. They were noticing the sweat that was coming off the brow as part of your endeavours to bring forward 3 documents, in fact, terms of reference, the Charter and the work programme. So on behalf of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, I want to acknowledge the Maori Committee and the subcommittee in terms of what you brought forward to this point in time. That said, there is some haste to be sort of put into this to move it forward, and notwithstanding perhaps some wordsmithing that needs to happen, what I'm going to suggest is that the way forward, because this hasn't yet been socialised within Hawke's Bay Regional Council, to the point where ultimately it might go forward in the spirit of partnership as an endorsed mutual document to our regional council for acceptance and endorsement. So there's a degree of socialisation to happen where there might be some discussion. I'm hopeful that the subcommittee, if it's that, might engage with some of our Hawke's Bay regional staff to bring it to a point where we're happy to both shoulder pokohiwi ki te pokohiwi to move this forward towards regional council for endorsement.
So how does the members, I suppose, from the Māori Standing Committee, if you've read through the document, and like you're saying, socialise, we can socialise, and your operational or your work teams need to be comfortable where everything sits in the document. I suppose for our members, is there anything bearing that we may have missed or that you don't like, or you can come back and kōrero about as members of our Māori Standing Committee? Sorry. I don't know.
Oh, look, I was going to, if I may, just raise the issue about wahi tapu and the minor matters, because I think it's important that we just ask the question, where in any of the council's plans reflects policy around wahi tapu? Because, as I mentioned earlier on, it used to sit inside the Charter. So my response back to you, I've been a little remiss because I know that there's been changes and I've just only thought about this and I hadn't had a chance to kind of go back in to see whether or not that's been captured in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, we did, and we did so with the wahi tapu that because it was in the documentation previously, but it hasn't been enacted operationally wise, and then we've got examples like Te Hua today, and there was some other issues around wahi tapu. But the framework was within our document was it's always been an item that's here, but I don't think from an operational perspective we haven't seen anything to protect those wahi tapu. So the document sort of captures it, but I suppose how does that work when these issues are happening in our wahi tapu, and have you gone through the exercise of identifying some of those, to put those protections in place?
I don't intend, sorry, Rick.
I understood that wahi tapu is primarily the responsibility of the district councils. So it's Hastings and Napier and Wairoa district councils have primary responsibility rather than the regional council. So I'm not sure what we're trying to do here.
Okay, so on the district council's register of wahi tapu, there's a disclaimer about them having, and this is a list that's still growing.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a reference to do, I think it may be with Runanga Lake, even Ohiti, where the council does recognise there is wahi tapu, but it's not on the register of the Hastings District Council. There's a gap in what I'm just saying.
But the point I make is that, as I understand it, the legal responsibility for wahi tapu is with the territorial authorities, Hastings and Napier.
I got that.
We are the regional council, it's not our area, so I'm just a little bit worried about moving onto their area at all. So if there's a dispute, they should resolve it, and we should just accept what they say.
If you have that conversation with each other, as well.
We should. So whatever they say is there's a wahi tapu, we should just accept it as a council, because that's their responsibility, not ours.
Okay, can I just ask a question? So when they do any work, so when you did the work on our like whakapau, care to, so did you rather than going through us through the mana whenua, do you go through the Wairoa District Council to find out if there's wahi tapu on their register?
Well, it should do. We should, because they're the ones who the district councils are the ones that hold that. That's their job.
When
Yeah,
we did our
yeah.
treaty claim, it was part of that we had to talk to the Wairau District Council to check what's on there. And a lot of the stuff isn't on there because we didn't want it on there.
That's also
Yeah.
true. Sometimes
Yeah, well-
that's exactly part of the problem. People
Now,
don't want it to be there because it's private knowledge.
Okay,
It's not to
so-
be public knowledge.
So I'll just tell you right now, so the District Council's review on wāhi tapu and its policy has been waning for 13 years. And there's been a number of different wāhi tapu give rise that are unregistered, and there just seems to be a gap with some of the council's program and lack of knowledge in knowing if they go into a certain area. And in fact, I think there may even be a recognition of some documents purporting to say from regional council point of view, we understand this is wāhi tapu, but even the district council, our Hastings District Council, have not got any reference to say it is a registered site. So we've got a problem. I'm just saying it might be their responsibility, but we've been waiting for this conversation for 13 years
Well, okay,
to get
well,
that policy through.
Can I
They
suggest
won't
your way
have it if you
forward?
don't talk to them.
I'm right at the very front end of this, guys.
Can I suggest
Yeah.
a way forward?
Yeah.
I don't want this council to weigh into areas which is not the council's responsibility. But likewise, if there's something not done, we shouldn't sit idly by and say nothing. So I just think once you've passed the resolution about the rule, the committee study, you should also then add to it that this committee asks the chief executive to follow up with the Hastings District Council about the concerns expressed regarding wāhi tapu, and get him to go and talk to them, and then to report to us the next time. How's that?
That'll be good. That'll be a good start.
Right?
Action?
I suppose just to add, in Whanganui Roto in regards to the Napier City Council, so we're going through an extensive process in regards to wāhi tapu, and then I know they've been drawing up some policy and some engagement, especially with Te Hotere coming an issue for our tai whenua, and so they're working through a process with the Napier City Council, and then you've got the Poheta Taonga Act as well. You've got, but then how do we get for Maori? Our main thing is how do we have a collective response within our region that's going to meet the need and protect our sites, say as kaitiaki. So the purpose, whoever's responsible, someone has to own it, and Rick's right in regards to Napier City Council and that, but we're still Māori standing committees representing our tai whenua, and that's a priority that we protect our wāhi tapu. And then we look at the Act in relation to the RMA Act, that brings that into, is it 6C, brings it into the kōrero around wāhi tapu. So it might be wāhi tapu on a waterway. And then
Perhaps I can sort of suggest a way forward, because we'll probably be here for the balance of today if we're going to dig into the content. And that might be that this committee here puts this draft forward to work with council, with my team will be one of those, to work with us in terms of forming a combined subcommittee to work through the content as to what it means and what the mechanics are behind that. Because there will be parts that will implicate other councils. So whilst we're in a hurry to get this endorsed at council, I think we've got to work through the detail of it first to understand what that means and where those responsibilities lie.
And I think the wāhi tapu was always in the charter, but as a rupu, we had never gone through the process of testing the wāhi tapu because it sat there, and we haven't implemented it. But now, if we've got a charter, we've got to refer to that document, because then that gives us direction and what we should be doing. So if that's in our charter as a committee, then we've got our onus as leaders within our charter to enact that. So it's in the charter. We're remiss of us not to take heed of that. So however that formulates within the plan, I don't know, that's a conversation.
It is in the charter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the charter.
It's in the charter.
Was
Yeah,
it
that's
the
what I
charter?
asked.
From the
Yes.
previous.
That's fine.
Well,
That's it.
present.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with it. I just think that the charter that's been put forward, it's just put forward to council for adoption.
Yeah.
I've got no problem with that. The issue of outstanding about wāhi tapu, we just asked the chief executive to talk to the other councils, what they're doing about
All of them.
all of them, about wāhi tapu, and that the Māori committee has expressed some concerns about the failure to identify them adequately and get a report from them all. Like, they come back and tell us what they've done or haven't. And then if they haven't done it, we can growl at them.
Yeah, boy.
In a friendly way.
Sorry? And a friendly, engaging.
They're not the enemy.
Kia ora. So just to move us along. So first and foremost, thank you to the three of you as our subcommittee for the work you've done on it, which is, as we heard, it isn't easy. So for those of us who sat here for a little while, it's not the first time that the charter and the terms of reference have come up and have needed work. I think my thing for me is charters and terms of reference, they are living documents. They are always subject to change, and they should change to reflect the times that we're all operating under. The question is around Waihi Tapu. I do take on board Rick's comment, and that some of the stuff sits with district. I think it's more about what is the intention in regards to Waihi Tapu, in regards to our charter, our document, and how do we reflect that intention. And I think it's just about giving mana to this thing called Waihi Tapu and recognition. So I think if I was to summarise what I was hearing, it's about just making sure that there is recognition from Hawke's Bay Regional Council that there is such a thing called Waihi Tapu out there. Yeah. And it comes in many forms. It can be in the actual waterway itself. It could be a piece of a waterway which actually does sit with Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So there are going to be times, but it does flick over. Other than that, I think the actual tenure of the document is you're pretty much covered off everything else that we kind of asked for to be in there, and from our feedback. So I think it does need a little bit of finessing, and I think putting our subcommittee group with members from Hawke's Bay Regional Council just to tidy that up, fine tune it, and get it to a point where we're able to present it, not only back to us but back to the regional council for adoption.
Better.
And then we can get ready for the next review of it.
So it sounds like, so if we move it today, and then workshop, there's a subcommittee that's been involved, carries on in collaboration with our
Well, we're happy
staff.
with the intent and the document. We've been through it. I've been through it. Uppy's been through it. And Roger's been through it. So we're happy with the court. Obviously, we talked to our chairs and they appeared happy with it. And if our committee's happy with it to a point with the Waihi Tapu, obviously then that's something we can work through. Because I'm happy, just to best of my knowledge, and I'm not saying we're perfect, all I'm saying is we're at a place where we need to get the document, so we're not acting on the old charter. We've got a new charter to work through, and that gives us, I suppose, tenure of time moving forward to engage with the council, because obviously our charter is like our vision moving forward, and then we can work through our charter when we're having conversations. So it gives us a better discussion document to work through. So I'm happy to move that. However you want to frame that up, that if it's draft form, we accept the charter subject to changes or discussions with regional council. Is that? Yep.
But can I just add, because I'm being really pedantic about this, but I'm not a man. And the sign says a chairman, and in here it says co-chairmen. I'm wahine and proud. And so my solution perhaps is, I was talking to Matuahami, and in our reo, there's no gender inequality. Tana, he, she, his, her. So perhaps under the designation for myself and Mike, we can have a Maori.
Should be simply the chair. And the thing about it was that explained to me years ago, when they used the term man, it was from the Greek word manus, the hand of the chair to guide the meeting. Was never originally, didn't originate from male. The manus, the hand, Greek, the hand that guides the meeting. So let's just cut the hand out and have the chair.
But Matua, could you give us a name for our particular?
Well, I sure like to see it was Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yeah. Oh no, for instead of what's called co-chairmen.
Co-chair.
Chairperson.
Did you guys write that?
That's petty.
Did you get it?
I like to take on board what Rick had said, but I know you're getting away from our level.
About what he did talk.
On Greeks.
On the Greeks.
We'll let you wordsmith then.
Oh, yeah, well,
Yeah, that's right. Let's try this new term, wordsmith.
I'll work that one. And if we could just also have that amendment that we've got Joella now, Brown as a proxy, just on the paperwork. So, you'll move that, Peter?
Yeah, I'll make
And
that.
a seconder?
So just to be clear,
But if it's one of the council?
adopts
One of
the
the
charter
committee.
and the
Oh,
charter
so
as
Yeah,
proposed.
Māori committee, terms of reference and charter is proposed.
So who was the mover?
It was, Peter
Oh,
and seconded
yeah.
by Māori. Well,
Is the work program included as part of that?
Was the
Big
work
program?
plan part of that?
So terms of reference,
just the template
charter,
at the moment,
work
please.
program.
Oh,
Work
okay.
schedule, was
The
it?
template.
In the template.
So part of this is that
Yeah.
the committee proposes its triennial
Yeah.
work program.
Yeah.
That was the other
So there'll be
third
no mahi.
And just
Turn up to meetings, work.
triennium work.
And just the other point, and I'm sure we had it in there, was just around our measurements and then what we do in a year. So we talked about measuring our success annually, just to say, hey, this is as a committee what we've done in the last 12 months, and then when we go back to our taiwhenuas and our marae and we speak to our whānau, we can say, hey, over the last 12 months as a Māori Standing Committee, this is some of our achievements, because then they can see what this committee's doing. So we just put that in there to have it. You call it a measurement, but it's good to go back to our whānau and say, this is what we're doing. Hey, so that was part of that document, because I think it's always good when you measure your success or non-success, or however you want to put it.
Well, you put the evidence of the mahi you put
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm just going to come back to my point through the chair, is that terms of reference,
Yeah.
charter, and triennium work program.
Yeah,
That's right.
And is that what we're moving?
it's
Oh,
the
so
template
understood.
where the program itself
It's all
is,
in the document, eh? You're talking
Yeah.
about schedule, yep. Work program, yep.
but it's not filled, it's the template. So
Yep.
we've got to do that as part of the action following on from here. Is that clear?
Total, those three.
We're not going to give a blank document.
Is this how you want it? Temporary charter training.
And train and whip and
That's
template
proposed.
is
Template.
because we haven't filled it.
We're in a tri
And then there's action to follow on. the
Yep.
subcommittee. So that was moved by Peter, seconded by Māori. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Yee-hee. Okay, so now the next one, tangata whenua orientation and remuneration.
It's number,
You, Peter?
page, what was it?
Item 9, page
Where
41.
did I see it?
Item 9.
41.
41.
41.
Come on.
It's approved, got Petty's name on the bottom of it, and Melanie and
So this is probably an associated document to the one previous that we've just endorsed, because all of the remuneration was actually narrated inside the terms of reference in the charter.
we covered that off in the, yeah, you're right. in the
So is
charter.
it a separate document received in Stella or would have been given to you today? The orientation document, I believe, has come out of my mine item in the regional council, hui, asking for an induction.
Yeah, and we raised it as health and
okay.
safety issue, and I say it's standard practice for any organisation you go into, you have an induction, and that's to make sure culturally you're safe, and then you're aware of what you're putting yourself into. So we go on these committees, it'd be good, and I think should be standard practice for any of our Māori Standing Committee members, like we've got a proxy coming in, soon for Tamatea, and when she should be inducted in prior to coming here and then sitting here and thinking, oh, geez, what am I meant to say? At least if she's got some scope.
So HBRC takes this on board that we've been rather late and remiss in terms of bringing the induction and the orientation guide to this committee. And you will see as one of the attachments on Stella, if you have that, that the orientation guide is quite comprehensive, 43 pages, I think.
It is.
And so we acknowledge the question and the request, and herein is the induction and orientation program.
Right.
Wanted to take time to look through that.
Yeah.
I had a good read. And they had a few of the documents we use as well. So I just noticed one of them was the conflict of interest register, And,
Okay.
you know, so yeah, I mean, that little request possessed a 45 page document, but at least now we have an
Yep.
induction process and a document.
I'll move the recommendation,
Yep.
just to speed it along then.
Yeah, yeah,
Without
okay.
going into the document, hand on
Moved
heart.
by- Oh, Marty. So
You guys
Marty,
okay?
Yeah, I'll second that.
and seconded by Peter, all in favour?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I acknowledge Anna Lee and Leanne as part of our governance team who have put in time to bring this together for us
Thanks.
today.
Kōrua.
Kia ora.
Hey, haere tonu, Rep 2, we are now up to farm environmental management plans. Oh, no,
Done that.
no,
Done that.
reports from regional council and committee meetings, and there was only mine, item 10, sorry. There was only mine, now that was just giving you an update on what we've been doing in the regional council space, all the workshops we attend and how busy we are. Where's Mike gone? The other time, go, yes, it's very tight. but informative, and then you can see there how much our other committee members we're really engaged with the regional council. We attend a lot of hui, and there's the evidence.
And I can give you, because I thought we were going to give I can give a verbal report in regards to the strategic committee, and Rick sits on there and James sits on there, so I can give a quick kōrero on our previous meeting, and some of it's been said, so I won't repeat it because James done an awesome job this morning just talking around the economic side of things in regard, because that was about a 288 page report, I think. So I won't go home through the whole 288 pages, but I'll just summarise some of the points, and I don't think I need to go through the financials that was covered off, and we're aware that there's a budget deficit in the regional council working, and then COVID-19's obviously been a huge impact, and like any of our organisations, they're all struggling with budgets at the moment. How do they get themselves through when they've spent a lot of money to get through COVID? So same as the regional council, we're all trying to work through that. So around that economic side, that's around there, cyber security risk management, and there was an item, and I suppose for all our organisations, when you talk about cyber risk and you look at what happened with the stock market exchange, and they're under threat, and that, so the regional council's putting in safety mechanisms, and I suppose we all should be looking at that. How do we, about cyber and people accessing our files, and that we need to look at that, so that they just, or there was a report presented in relation to that. Regional water security project in Central Hawke's Bay, that kōrero come up around that, and then obviously Roger and Mike has been attending those hui, and so from Central Hawke's Bay, they're keeping an eye on what's happening down there. I did ask a couple of questions just around one who was on the board, and on the actual discussion document, which is on page 49 around social benefits section, around tikanga and mahinga kai. So just, you know, when you go down to some of that policy, just how that reflects within the Maori framework and those definitions. So yeah, when you talk about mahinga kai and the social benefit, how's that going to impact on Maori? But I'm assured that Mike and Roger will be on top of that for Central Hawke's Bay. Water storage, obviously there was a big kōrero and was covered, James covered all about that water storage, and I suppose because there's a lot of kōrero around the why and the water and water storage, and the group, the leadership group set up down in Central Hawke's Bay, and then obviously our discussion, we've had a lot of discussion about Te Manawa Te Wai, and then I suppose for us, for Māori, we've read the report, and it seems like there's a consensus that people were supportive of some of that framework. So I suppose how does that, and I did ask the question in minor items, how is that framed into the regional council's planning documents moving forward? And we're in a new space, but how does that, because that may answer some of our questions long term in our long term planning. So it's most probably, and I know we talked about workshopping in regards to Manawa Te Wai, so that'll be a good workshop for us to have, and it may alleviate some fears or create some questions moving forward, how that's framed up and all this work's been done and why. Because I'm just summing up that 288 pages and maybe that's 150 pages I've summed up in regards to the water storage and all the investment that government's putting in and the planning with the regional council. And as we said earlier, it's as big as the seabed and foreshore corridor because why water is important. We all need it to survive. So that's a big corridor and acknowledge the work that Mare and that's done around that. So yeah, how do we move forward? So that discussion was part of the economic team. Cycleways, obviously there's some cycleways being developed and supported through the regional council, so that's a big movement in that area. Obviously the organisation performance reporting and that was just reflected on the hard work the regional council's been doing and staff working very hard to work through, and James covered that this morning. Staff been working really hard to meet the needs of the council in the COVID sort of scenario. So I think we're all aware of that. Everyone's, it's been something you don't plan for and then it comes up and then you've got to operationalise the plan and then work with staff and then staff even to do all the mahi. So that's just acknowledging the work that they've done. CDM I covered there. And then about the drought relief, obviously the drought and that farming committee that was in here talked about it earlier, there's a drought in the environment at the moment, and then the effects, because that's going to happen potentially again when you look at climate change and that, and then obviously regional council's planning in regards to what mitigation strategies they put in place to support those farmers. So that was just a big, there was like Alfie was saying, there's a big corridor around that management, and then obviously we have fourth line in regards to the port and what's happening down there. But that's just a quick synopsis of the corridor.
Thank
Kia
you.
ora.
And we have, is that your written report there?
Oh yeah, I can
Could
submit that. Yeah,
copy
it's just
to
notes in there.
Emily,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay.
So that's both those. If we can get a move to, we can remove our tangata whenua. Oh, sorry, regional council and committee meetings reports. Henny Wai, second up, please. Who's going to sleep? Holder, all in favour? Aye. Now we're on to Aroha Mai Shane Gilmer, Farm Environmental Management Plans 13.
Just as Shane's coming up, Shane actually had a 23-slide presentation all prepped and ready for us.
That's three.
But he's taken kindly to our assembly here, and he's going to shorten that up to a concise presentation. Farm environmental management plans. This isn't so far removed from Tom and John's corridor earlier on. And for those who are shareholders in incorporation farms, this is another time to take heed. Kia ora tata, kia ora Shane.
Kia ora, Shane.
Nā koutou. Ko kahanunu, toku iwi, ko rākai pāka, toku hapu, maimakai, toku maunga, ko niuhaka, toku awa. Kahanunu toku marae. Nā mihi nui i te kaupapa te rā. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Yeah, Shane.
So today I'm going to give you just the farm planning update, a little bit of context around what's in a farm plan, what does it do, how does it seek to achieve its purpose, and then the next steps, where to from here. And then I want to close out the slide presentation today with a corridor to promote some discussion around mahinga kai and opportunity to integrate mahinga kai into the HBRC farm plan template. So
don't hold back on putting a sharp edge on this presentation.
I will not. And so also some context around what is the extent of the job from here, and that is around 3,500 more farm plans to come into the Regional Council by 2025. So the farm plan is in its own right a kaitiaki document. So where does it fit? Well, it has a pretty unique opportunity. Unlike other work streams within the organisation, it actually integrates the majority of the departments in their delivery. So, yeah, you'll see the list up there. It's science, it's biodiversity, it's regulation, and we also have new rules that are coming out. So first of all, the Tuki Tuki overview. So we have just over 1,000 farm plans in Tuki Tuki at the moment. And what you're seeing there is a spatially enabled data set So all of that green you see on the Tuki Tuki catchment there, that's property that's being managed with a farm environmental management plan. And so that data set is also recognised nationally as an outstanding baseline for us here in farm planning and in science for analysis purposes, and also for us here at the Regional Council for the foundation of what farm planning can do given the extent of the template that the Tuki Tuki catchment plan gave us. And I'll run through a bit more detail about the analysis next. So firstly, inside the Tuki Tuki catchment plan, the Schedule 22 as it's known to us is the farm plan template. It's very thorough and it's excellent in regard to risk profiling, just what that property or agricultural system is doing from an environmental perspective. It targets and identifies critical source areas, which are environmental hotspots, contaminant sinks that have access or a pathway to water. The phosphorus management plan, that is the cornerstone of the Tuki Tuki farm plan, largely because that macronutrient is what's driving prolific periphyte and algal growth within the Tuki corridor. So if we can limit phosphorus entering the waterway, we can limit the growth of algae. There's a limit setting in framework, which I'll talk a little bit more further on, and the action list. So the action list is where it all rubber hits the road. So that's where the farm planner brings all those risks, the rules and regulations out of the catchment plan and pulls that together with what does the farm owner or the land manager of the property need to do to both meet the rules, which is the minimum requirement, but also long term, what is the aspiration for the property owner and what do they want to see their environmental footprint look like in the future. So just a bit of detail around how does the farm plan seek to achieve its purpose. So critical source areas are primary example. They're the first thing that the farm plan looks at across the property. So sediment is the master stressor. So sediment comes out of multiple environments on the property. It can be as simple as stream bank erosion. Erosion, as we know it, we all live in Hawke's Bay, it's a dominant thing out there. Also, when paddocks are going through cropping rotations, just whenever there's bare soil, sediment has an ability to move into the waterway, and it's the single most important contaminant that we can keep on the landscape. It displaces more aquatic biodiversity than any other contaminant. E. coli and phosphorus. So E. coli, again, stock access to waterway, which has now obviously been mitigated through the stock exclusion rule. And phosphorus hangs on to the soil particles. So whenever you see surface water runoff or brown water travelling across the environment, you'll see those top three priority travelling together. And whilst nitrogen, you'll also see that in surface water runoff, that has the ability to go through the soil horizon. So it has two ways it actively moves through the environment. So it's more efficient and effective to getting into our waterways than any other of those contaminants. The second priority is just the high risk activities, so the farm management decisions on the property. So the photo here is a classic example of Southland and the winter grazing that happens down there. But very quickly you can see that those four contaminants, or the four major contaminants in any agricultural system, will be flowing out of that practice. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that pugging?
That's pugging, yep. So as James mentioned earlier, the new rules around pugging, that would obviously be in breach. So yeah, feedlots, high intensive fertiliser use and intensive finishing systems, just those activities are key for what...
So there's a crop next door, I just see in the background and that, so when when they're going, because that's generally what happens in that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's fodder being grazed in winter. That's what winter grazing is.
Feedlots.
Yeah, that's what you'll see down south. That's a little bit different to what we see here. We're not as adverse as what that photo is. But yeah, that is what the new regulations are out to achieve, a more sustainable way that you can do winter grazing. And I also have an example of the winter grazing planner.
So Peter, on that one, what you'd need in the future is you'd need to be back fencing it, and you'd have to be monitoring it and moving the stock through as they're eating it, and staying vigilant to that. That would be completely illegal under the new regulations.
Oh, yeah.
Prosecution offence.
Yeah, exactly.
Should have been completely illegal years ago.
Yeah, definitely. And so the third priority for a farm planner is bare earth, and that's wherever you see it. As we mentioned before, sediment is the master stressor. So yards, tracks, fallow period, which is the bare soil time between crops, between species, erosion, and those sorts of things. and good management practice. Now that's environmental standards that are out there from every industry group, and so they're incorporated into the farm. So every farm system has their own set of environmental standards, and that document was founded back in 2015 and is still relevant today. And so, as James mentioned before, how would you manage the new NES rules for winter grazing? Well, they use a planner like this, and it's so what is key to understanding? Sorry?
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
That's right. We've got a good intro from James there. So what is important around that winter grazing is that you can actually significantly reduce your environmental footprint from planning and management. So this particular grazing planner, what is used for every property engaged in this activity from next year onwards, and it's also currently being done as well. So HBRC and Dairy NZ have pulled this together back in 2017, and this is now widely used and promoted through Dairy NZ. But what we've got here, just as a quick run through, this is a critical source area, which again might just be a swale in that paddock. So a fence goes around that, which is the hot wire, and that is not cultivated for the winter grazing. There's also a buffer zone here, which is not grazed, in the cultivation direction, and then the grazing direction, and then what James mentioned before about catch fence and back fence and portable trough. So you're looking after your soil as you move your animals through it, but ultimately you've identified that paddock first and are trying to reduce your overall impact. So the outcome of that is you don't want surface water runoff taking any one of those 4 contaminants out of your winter grazing block and into a stream.
Jane, with the critical source area, beyond fencing, are there any other rules for vegetation in or just outside that fencing area? Or is it just purely fencing and that's it?
So in this particular example? Yes.
And the rules that will be implemented?
Yeah, no, so there's not any rules around the critical source area in its own right.
Yeah.
So it's just how do you mitigate a critical source area given any situation on the farm property?
There is the setback, obviously, from the waterway, which from memory, is it 10 in the winter grazing regs, 10 metres, or is it 5?
Yeah, it's 5.
It's 5
Yeah.
metres in the winter grazing regs.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess that's the other mitigation. Then there's the slope. Can't be on a.
So would that off the waterway, would there be an onus, or would the regional council, who would pick up, because you could riparian plant those areas, say if you've taken them all, those streams, then it would make sense to plant those streams.
Yeah, absolutely. It also makes sense not to have your winter grazing but in a paddock that has a stream. So that'll be your first step. Is this paddock selection correct? And that's where you start from. There's a long list of how you manage winter grazing, and it starts with paddock selection, and you try and don't have that to start with is the first order.
Is a catch fence just the fence when you remove the front fence, let them go forward on the next line of chow? Is that what it is?
So your catch fence is if your stock break the first break.
Oh.
So you don't want them charging through the rest. So that's just your secondary barrier.
Just hooked it up to the mains, that fixed that.
Absolutely. Nutrient budgets. So I just want to give you a little update. This is looking at what the Overseer nutrient budget platform spits out for every farm property. So just as an example, that top line there is total farm area, total nitrogen leach for the area. And this is around a 400 hectare dairy farm. This is nitrogen leached by kilogram per hectare, which is 61. Phosphorus across the entire property, and then phosphorus by the hectare. And then GHG, which is your carbon or CO2 equivalents, it's 10 tonnes per hectare. And just to give you a bit of an example, with regard to that last couple of slides, winter grazing, this is a fodder beet block. It's leaching 351 kilograms per hectare. So this is one end of the spectrum. This is the extreme end, for example's sake. And at the bottom here is the trees and scrub block, and it's leaching 3. So rolling hill country, typical sheep and beef systems in Hawke's Bay would be somewhere between 10 and maybe 17 kilograms of N per hectare. And once you're between 17 kilograms and 25 kilograms per hectare, you're embarking on some intensive grazing and some cropping. And then 25 and above, that's generally just more cropping, more intensive grazing, and into the dairying at the end of the scale as well.
Just a question. If you're leaching 351 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, how much are they applying? That
Yeah,
seems
so-
an extraordinary amount of bloody
Absolutely.
nitrogen.
Yeah, so one of the myths out there is that nitrogen that's leached is nitrogen applied. Largely what you're seeing and what drives nitrate leaching is stocking rate. So it's the amount of animals on that block, it's the age of the animal, it's a dairy cow, there's lots of them, it's urine. So the highest concentration of nitrogen in your landscape is from urine from a cow.
Oh, so the fodder beet's the missed thing. So you talk about the planting the fodder beet, the thing, and then the stock being used on to eat it, and there's the stock thing. So it's the total picture. All right, I got you.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
350, right?
Yeah, because that's what a farmer conversation, we had a farmer, and he was an old farmer that's retiring, selling his farm, but that's what he'd used the same theory. He said it was the applied fertiliser that was put onto the farm that was leaching through, not, like you said, not with urine in there, but he said reduce the fertiliser applied and you'll have a reduction in pollution going into the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but it's largely stocking rate and size of stock class. So this is what our analysis can tell us inside the tuki-tuki. So what we've done here is we've used those subcatchments inside the tuki-tuki and treated them like a single farm. So if you draw your attention to the Manganuku, it's got 73. So the Manganuku catchment is at 73% of its allowed limit, but the Manganuku is currently over its dissolved inorganic nitrogen trigger. So each property within the Manganuku is requiring a resource consent. The Kahakuri in the middle there, it's at 100% of its limit. And then obviously we've got a couple of red ones down there, Tukipo and Makiri 2. As an entire subcatchment, treated like a farm, that would be above its limit. And the key reasons why we've got red down that part of our region is that's our dairying region. That's where the soil is better for that, and that's where you get higher rainfall. So it's doubled with leakier soils and farm system type. The regulation inside the tuki-tuki requires farm property, as I mentioned, if the subcatchment is over its dissolved inorganic nitrogen concentration, and that's a 5-year average. Also for properties that are over their individual nitrogen leaching limit. And so we've got this map here is showing you what is the average nitrogen leaching for all properties inside that subcatchment. So this is good to tell us whether or not our N setting framework is matched to in-stream concentration, or how does our farm systems, now that we know their individual leaching number, what does that also tell us about farm systems, their locality within those catchments? And in science, they talk about nitrogen attenuation. So if we had a farm system away from the main stem of water, we know it's leaching this much nitrogen. What does that mean for as the nitrogen goes towards the stream through groundwater? What does that impact? So it's good analysis for us to focus in on where to put our effort and how does the science connect with the framework.
And just a question on that. So with water usage in there, and you talk about nitrates in that, and is that, when you look at volume of water, is it reduced? Does that increase the because obviously that's more pollutant entering into the waterway with limited water, so you would think that would increase the amount of pollution. You know what I mean? Because we had reports from Polder about streams in Parongaho drying up and some had a trickle. So what happens? You know what I mean, with those figures, like you say, 16.9, 13.7, is that a higher increase over the summer months? You know what I'm saying? Because it's got to go somewhere, doesn't it?
So what are you saying in regard to
pollution? Because
you're talking about concentration versus flow?
Yeah.
So dilution? Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good point. So in the tuki-tuki there, those subcatchments that originate out of the plains, they have a far less dilution rate than those catchments that are connected to the Ruahine Ranges. So those ones, specifically Makiri 2 is a perfect example. As you've seen from the previous slide, it's 125% of its limit. It's got the highest, on average, nitrate leaching per hectare in any other subcatchment, but it will never breach its dissolved inorganic nitrogen limit because of dilution from the ranges. So that's exactly right.
Sort of subs. You mean I suppose they think that need to be brought into some form of control to reduce the pollution and not have the rest of the catchment subsidising their farming practice. You would
Yeah, absolutely, which is why there's two trigger points for the tuki-tuki. So one is your individual farm property, which captures the individual, and then secondly it's the in-stream nutrient concentration. So that's why there is two of those frameworks playing out in that particular state. And I guess, yeah, nationally as well, they talk about load. So what is the correct load when they set nutrient limits? And that also rolls back to farm industry type and farm systems to give limits back in that way as well, which we'll see down in Canterbury specifically. They have zones and they use a nitrate load and roll that back up to farm system.
Shane, what drives the 5-year average? What are the factors that drive it being 5 years?
Sure, yep, so it's just farming practice. So dairy farming, cropping, intensive finishing have a little leachate. It's a soil type. It's sampled monthly as part of the state of the environment. So it can be climatic changes as well. It's just, yeah, general agriculture.
The state of the environment, because that's every 5 years, that's where you get your average.
No, it's just stated in the catchment plan that it will take a 5-year average, and the 5-year average is that 0.8 milligrams per litre for its DIN trigger. So it's just to say that if you had an abnormal year, that a 5-year average would, give you a very robust length of data set that said, yes, we have a problem, or no, we don't have a problem. Not too sure how I did that.
Last slide.
Right, and just next steps, where to from here? So we're beginning farm plan auditing, which addresses farm plan quality. As James mentioned earlier, there's new rules and regulations under the MPS and NES, so that can be brought into the farm plan document. We're looking to raise the bar with biodiversity, so by making an HBRC template and then having that rolled out with our farm plan providers. And I've also put on there climate resilience. So obviously with a declared climate change emergency, farm planning has an opportunity in that climate resilience space. Whenever you're talking about farm sustainability, that's also climate smart. But also the first key point looking ahead with farm plans is to identify the marginal landscapes within that property and then run through what is that overall carbon accountancy for that particular steep slope, what are the tree species for that particular property, and then that will build climate resilience as we move forward. So, this is my discussion slide. So, really keen to have a kōrero around mahinga kai. Myself, I've been involved with the Cultural Health Index. I've completed State of the Takiwa. Know a little bit about Maori Compass. Active mahinga kai gatherer myself. Consider myself a little bit understood around what mahinga kai is, what the value is. But more importantly today, we have an opportunity to put mahinga kai into the HBRC farm plan template.
Awesome.
And what should that look like? Just want to have a kōrero around what you think it should be, how we could do that together. So pushing this task out to the committee as well. I've just put a couple of points on there just to get it started, but yeah, environmental mitigation across the property, overall reducing your environmental footprint, reducing the contaminants to water, restoring riparian habitat and corridors, provides for mahinga kai. But what else could it be? Is environmental mitigation providing for mahinga kai in its own right, or is mahinga kai something else? Nutrient cycling and efficiency and reduction of that into a waterway, treating a waterway like a drain. How does that provide for mahinga kai values? So, yeah, we can land that however we see fit. We do have a couple of leaders in that space. We have Ngāi Tahu, who've been in this space for 5 years in partnership with ECAN. But when I questioned them in the last 7 days, how do I pull together all of what I've just said to you, and what does it actually look like when I'm measuring that metric on the ground, and how am I reporting on that? The phone went silent. So whilst it looks like we're behind in delivering on this, we probably have equal opportunity to lead it and show leadership in this space. So
Any comment?
So I suppose in that mahinga kai, and then you just looking at your planning, you say fencing, streams in there. There's obviously opportunity to build the biodiversity in that area, and then plant trees that can attract tui and feed our native species. Hey, so when you look at some easy wins, or appears easy wins, if they're going to fence, and you would plant, and then you encourage the biodiversity to grow within the area. Hey, so that, I just think of simple things, and then how can you implement it in the farming plan practice, and then if farmers, want to work within that farming plan, then how do we support and encourage them to achieve that? I'm just putting that out because you asked.
Absolutely.
And that's, it'd be nice to see a nice strip of waterway fenced, and then manuka or whatever, native trees growing in that environment, and encouraging the biodiversity, the tuna, the eels, and all that, and what awesome habitat, some native coda. Hey, I don't know if is that up for discussion in that farming
Absolutely.
plans?
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Excuse me,
Martin.
Chair, I've got to go. I've got a date with some kahikatea.
With some kaigatea.
Won't be late.
Better not stand them up.
Upside down.
Ka kite.
Alright.
Mare.
Kia ora, Shane, thanks for this. And also too, so far as having to include amongst the things a provision about measuring that type of activity in amongst the scheme of all things. I guess two things. One is that we're currently working, as you may know, with Maori and others around setting a Maori cultural kind of indicator framework we're calling Apo Matara Ho. And within that, of course, is the cultural indicators about access to get to places in order to do the mahinga kai. So I'd like to think that this conversation can just kind of carry on rather than in here, but just to indicate that, it would be fair to say that quite a few of these places too that we used to traditionally get access to have been closed off, gated. So I think the relationship also needs to bode with having permission to go onto places. And where once upon a time you used to go, now you can't because it's got all of these kind of locks, padlocks, everything else. But nevertheless, it would be good if I could just say, we'd be happy to kind of provide some steer and advice when we start to kind of evolve this kind of framework model out to just tell us exactly what needs to go in to be a very good way of looking at a measure, particularly around mahinga kai. So it has quite a number of values around that, and it's just a matter of just getting to bring that conversation in. But I'd like to pick up on that,
Perfect. I did identify to Piri that the first step out of here would be to contact yourself and the team. So
It's an invitation from
got your number.
Kia ora, Shane. Really welcoming to see that up there in your farm management plans. Just to follow on what Mare was saying, be nice to sit down next to the farmers to work that out with a cultural monitoring platform. Doesn't matter which one, but to be able to, because I find it really troublesome to, like the clearance of channels and things like that. It's going to require you to remove tuna and such and other species that could be tidal, you never know, into another waterway upstream, what impacts they might have that kind of mahi on the species, always aligning it with te mano te wai again, trying to raise the Maori always. So that whole riparian and habitat value needs to work hand in hand, work holistically. So the old cultural index or the Maori compass would be nice to apply, even around the nutrients, how much nutrients goes in there to, when's the dying date for that tuna, how long can it last? Those are the kinds of values that'll be nice to work at, so these bottom lines.
Just through the chair, is that another invitation directly to you?
I think it might be a collaboration.
It'd be nice, the north and south meets.
And I suppose it comes down to water take, and I'll give an example of Maranui, and traditionally pataka kai for our waiheke from our mōtio whānau that used to eel tuna up the back, but you go up there and it's streamed, and I know there's all those whareas going up, those lifestyle blocks, but then you look at that, there used to be a lake, drained, and it no longer feeds the Tutaikiri, and now through our whakapapa, through our whānau, you say, we used to all that creek, and it used to feed the Tutaikiri. Now it's all dried up, no tuna come down there, and it's you go to the headwaters. So how do we, through these farm management plans, because those are most really lifestylers or few farmers left, but how do we replenish that area as an example? Because I suppose that would be my monitor to test your water plan. So right, here's the area that's been drained and mistreated, and now how do we rejuvenate or enhance that area? And it was common, a lot of kōrero, a lot of waiata about that area. It was occupied, marae, there was marae, there was occupation, there's urupapa around that area, but if you're talking about a management plan, I'd like to see how that's effective to enhance the area, as an example. So that's where you're going.
Just a quick supplementary, Katarina.
Just a supplementary one following Peter was, you know how when you're ageing longfin tuna, they could be living up to in excess of over 100 years. How are we going to guarantee their return back in the, when it comes to migrating back out? And any culvert changes and replacements, will there be fish barriers or ladders or pumps?
Yep, absolutely.
Really, yeah.
Yep, so you might also be aware there's new fish passage rules have come out as well. So yeah, we could, it's about just integrating all those together to get a good outcome for all.
And Hinamoi and then Charlie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've heard what everyone said, and I get that feeling of ki utiki tai and making sure there's habitat corridors that somehow connect up. Because if we're talking about our mahinga kai and its abundance and its health, then we have to provide the environment for it to be healthy. That means allowing the passages and also creating that habitat. So if there is a measure to, along with your plan, and you've got a section on mahinga kai, that's what I'd like to see. If I had my own awa stream at the back, I'd want to know that it's, it's vegetated, it's shaded, it's cool in the summer, because that's how you're going to bring abundance back. So it's living conditions.
Yep.
Kia ora, Shane. I noticed our regulations sort of starting to push all our farmers and other land users into fencing things out and all that. But that only stops the animal, right? It's not going to not stopping the nutrient. I think the obvious answer to me would be to put in a dike or something, a bit of a levee. It'll stop everything going into the water. We expected of the foresters to put up a barrier now for their logs. And I guess that was my other question is, I guess maybe that's too hard a line. At what point is it going to come to where we actually order them to do things? Where we actually order them to do things. I know the Southlands had fencing for many years. They've had that time frame to get into it. We've got the similar time frame, but we don't quite enforce it because it's still thought to be in the too hard basket. But there must be coming a point, like you got all those catchments that are over the nutrient losses. So when are we going to actually become the guys with the big stick?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I guess, in the tuki from next year, there's a new consent deadline for the 26th of February. So that will be when the guys have to stump up and put together a good application to be consented within those exceeding subcatchments. And then, the new regulations come in force next year. So both winter grazing, fish passage, and 2023 for all stock exclusion.
Yep.
So
many of us here also have forestry blocks in our rohe. What is the forestry environmental management plan?
Oh boy.
Sure.
And how does that get pushed into this catchment management?
Yes, so there are now harvest plans required for all forests undertaking harvest. There's also planning required around the establishment of new forests and consents required in certain classes of country where there are issues of erosion. We've now got a dedicated 2 staff, 2, maybe 3, including one who is part funded by Hastings District Council, out doing compliance continuously now around those harvest activities, making sure that the harvest plans as submitted are being complied with.
So we're the regulators for that?
We are the regulators for that, and we're on the case. And by and large, I'm assured that we're seeing people fulfilling those requirements in terms of the plans. Whether the regulations are tough enough is an open question, and I know MPI is reviewing them at the moment to see whether or not they are going to do the job. What we are seeing, though, is still a lot of legacy issues. There's a lot of slash around that, you know, was cut over the last few years before the regulations came in, and that's not necessarily captured by regulation. And, you know, for the next few years, when we have heavy rainfall events, we're still going to have a slash as an issue. But it's something that's just going to require constant monitoring. We've been looking at doing a bit of flying, so doing flyovers of all the harvest, just as a way of getting across all the harvest areas quickly, because obviously the drive times to many of these spaces is prohibitive to do a lot of compliance in one day. But yeah, essentially foresters are now coming under the same sort of regime as farmers in terms of needing to have a plan, and that being a regulatory plan, and then having compliance over the top.
I do have one more that's sort of been
drone. Yeah, well, so we do use a drone to get visibility of sites, but you know, the distances we're talking are so large that actually using a fixed wing aircraft is probably the most efficient way of doing it.
Just one question in regards to that information, because we're going through the Mo'aka plan change. Have you done that for the Mo'aka catchment, that same breakdown in regards to nitrogen and leaches and that into the Mo'aka?
So that is a breakdown after the fact. So this is when every single farm plan has been submitted to the regional council. So that's when we can do that sort of analysis. But really, if I was to go back 5 years and ask the catchment advisory group who were active in Tukituki, who were the high risk users, who were the high risk farming systems, they would have known them by name, and they would have known how they took their coffee. All this analysis does is just reconfirm what we already know, but quantifies and wraps some science around that impact. This is largely known by just farm system type and the susceptibility of that soil. So it's quite well known.
Yeah, and so it's a question: can we, you know, if we're going through those draft changes for the Mo'aka, are we able to get some data and some information? So when we're having kōrero to what's it suppose as a Māori committee, that we've got that data to have the kōrero, so we've got a knowledge of the environment that we're discussing. So if we need to make change, obviously we want to see those changes. For that, I'm just talking about that catchment, because obviously it's great to talk to. What about the other catchments?
Absolutely. Yes, I am aware there's quite a lot of work and scientific understanding of Tahurua catchment. So yeah, there would be a little bit of farm modelling done in there alongside surface water and the groundwater. But yeah, we can certainly risk profile catchment scale. So.
Just behind you, we've got Kerry, whose team is very much leading alongside Tangata Whenua with the Mo'aka plan change. So probably best placed in terms of answering that question.
Well, you get the question. So if we can get some information, some data, because it's good you're making an informed decision based on the state, the environment. So if we've got that data, it's good to have.
So there was actually a paper that was meant to go to RPC last month, but we ran out of time to present that on the Mo'aka plan change. But that provides an update on the science that we already have and indicates where the science has identified issues. So we do have a lot of that, as Shane has indicated, we have a lot of that information already.
Awesome. And that,
sitting in science documents.
And I suppose the RPC, that's good, the Regional Planning Committee, but then I suppose there's mana whenua that live on the awa, that practice our kaitiakitanga every day. It's a different committee, and I suppose we've talked about te mana o te wai and our relationships. Well, we practice ahi ka, because we're ahu whenua with trust, and kaitiakitanga over the Mo'aka and Upper Mo'aka and Ripia. So when we're having those conversations, all I'm saying, we need that information, because we'll be the ones making the decision, and we're the ones that hold that kaitiakitanga over the awa. Because it's about practice I suppose it's around engagement, and if we govern over 20, 30,000 acres, and within that catchment, obviously, we're a major player in the corridor. That's what I'm saying. So it'd be good to get that information, because do we get it up? And I respect the RPC. I don't know the members that sit on RPC,
So
but
I think the documents I'm talking about are actually historical documents, and they've actually been brought to the conversation previously. Obviously, the Mohaka plan change is stalled a couple of times, so I think it's nothing new for tangata whenua. These documents have been presented to you before, but we can certainly,
yeah, we get
share
that
them
again, and we have the corridor when we have those meetings. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Just quickly, because she just informed me that when we get to 4 o'clock, we've reached our limit.
Just very quickly, Shane, my marae is on the Ngariroro River, the old Ngariroro, called Patiki, and of course Ruhapi is on Karamu stream. So do you guys monitor those two waterways?
Yep.
So where does the main contaminant come that goes into those two streams?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you, sorry. Yeah, that'll be a question for the water quality scientists.
Oh, you're not.
These are farm plans.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, it's
come
fine.
on.
It's
Thank you.
an-
now.
it's
If
another
you're bringing all this information to this meeting, why isn't there a contact? Why don't you know that?
I know about the nitrogen that's polluted the tahurea up the top, and it's going to take 100 years to repair it, and they've riparian planted, and then there was a drop-off in relation to HPRC's engagement with mana whenua, because it was a political item years ago. So what I'm saying is, I know? No, I don't know.
So,
to be honest.
I think if so we can move this along, it's sounding like, maybe a bit of a get together with some of our key people, and it's sounding like, like you need to go and engage with tai whenua, go through each of the tai whenua and talk to our people about the mahinga kai measures.
So perhaps first port of call is with Maori and with Katarina,
Katarina,
and they'll be
yeah.
giving guidance about where the next steps might be.
And I'm a waipara.
Uncle, just to wind this part up, anei te tahi o ngā tamaiti mai a rā kai pāka me ona pukinga. Kei tēnei te momo mai.
E ori te ki tētahi o ngā whānau pōmana kei reira. Ori pōmana ma.
Nei whāngas e Christie's.
True.
Ah.
Mai hanga kai, o tāku nei kei roto ki te kōhua kai. Awa kupu reo pākea kei reira. Macro whānesi no mō reo ki reira. Me kupu, tukuna ki ngā kupu awa reo ki roto ki te reo Māori. I'll know then. Macro, what's that? Macro plates.
Macrophytes.
Aquatic weed.
Yeah.
Awa mera.
Uncle was wondering about what they look like in a pot.
Yeah. As long as you got water cress and not the water celery, you'll be right.
Te whānau torohuka.
Kia ora, Shane. Thank you very much.
So if we could get someone to move the Farm Environmental Management Plan, the FEMP, staff report. Hene Wine, second. Paola, all in favour?
Aye.
Carried. We're going to have a cup of tea soon, but we're going to bring Nathan in, and Katarina and I have already had a hui with Nathan, a pre-hui before the hui. So this is you want to introduce Nathan?
So those, as Nathan's coming up, those of you who might have read a little pānui I sent out a week or so ago.
Yeah, I did.
We're fortunate in the Māori Partnerships Group that Ian's team has allowed Nathan to come across as the Northern Area Manager into the Māori Partnerships Group, particularly for those from within the wider northern part of our region. Nathan's not an unfamiliar face to you, but what we have done is asked Nathan as Northern Area Manager, particularly around relationship development, is to move, this is the hardest part, is get him to move out of Wairua and over into Mohaka Pāhauwera area, which he has kindly agreed to do. So he'll feature as part of the discussions around the Mohaka plan change as that progresses. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nathan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Nathan Heath, toko ingoa. I appreciate the time. I'm also going to assume that this report has been read. Look, the purpose of it is twofold. As part of my reporting obligations, I do need to prepare an annual report around the activity that has occurred and that I've been involved with in Northern Hawke's Bay. And the second part of it is just to give you a bit of an update on a case study that's being developed in conjunction with work down in the Tuki, looking at how Hawke's Bay Regional Council goes about its place-based, so more specific to an area, how we orientate our work programs and things like that. So both of those two pieces of work are attached to this report. Basically, from my perspective, I think that the area itself, Wairoa, my kids are fourth generation, so we're born and raised in Wairoa, very Wairoa proud, and so it's been a real pleasure to go back and actually work in that area with the whānau, with the landowners and that sort of thing to help broker things happening. You will all probably well appreciate it's quite a unique and authentic area, 66% Māori. So the relationship side of the role is critically important, and it is actually probably the lion's share of the work that I do up there. There are a number of long outstanding issues that have occupied a big chunk of my time, but I think the equal balance to the issue is the opportunity. And equally up in Wairoa there is so much opportunity for enhancement, protection and added value to the assets and the environment up there for multiple benefits for the community as well. So that's all I am going to say. I'm basically going to, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any of those. Other than that, yeah. So if there are any questions, happy to take them.
Mike?
I suppose it'd be helpful for the committee if we heard from our Wairoa whānau, how have they found the relationship? And more importantly, the amount of resource that Hawke's Bay Regional Council has put in its sub work group into Wairoa, how has that benefited the community?
Well, from a mana whenua point of view, we've had and anyway, Katarina's gone, she'll be back soon. We've had a lot of engagement with Nathan, and to the point that he's been there with his daughter planting trees with us. If there's any issues, we'll go to him, and also refer a lot of our people to him because he's in our vicinity. I think what's been put forward about, the relationship building, and you have 64% Māori in our community. It's a very big part of what you're doing. And you can see the amount of mahi that Nathan's having to do. And then he's called on to do a lot of other things. And one thing or question I'd have, James, is do we have a compliance person in Wairoa, because we're getting a lot of issues, and I always refer people to Nathan, but poor Nathan's doing everything, jack of all trades. Do we have a compliance person?
So we don't have anybody who's living up there. We've got some compliance officers that are dedicated to going up there and travel up for issues. With those regulations that we've been hearing about that are coming through from freshwater, I think we're going to get to the point that there's going to be so much compliance work in Wairoa to do that we are going to need a permanent presence up there. So that's something we've got to consider in the long-term plan.
Most definitely, because I don't know how far I can stretch it. Now he's going to Pāhu, so we're spreading him a bit thin. They're just commenting on our relationship with Nathan and this report and everything else. So I just asked about a compliance person. So you got anything to add, Katarina, before we have a cup of tea?
That's definitely a big one, and I guess the communication between some of the issues, like the dumping issues and the cows and the awa issues, and having a point of contact to go to in Wairoa, because as you have noticed, it's just pretty full on now. There's issue after issue, and it'd be nice to have some concerted effort around the compliance.
What's an issue example?
Cows.
Oda from AFCO.
Oh, there.
Ammonia from AFCO. Dumping. Yeah, a lot of grazing in the waterways. Yeah, other issues as well, like identifying places that are highly eroded.
Forestry too, yeah.
And forestry / practices.
Everything.
3 forests coming down around Rikaturi. Just seen it last week. They've already started to cut. Yeah, just all of that kind of stuff.
So if
So,
he's getting pulled in every direction, so are we.
Yeah, I know, so I was going to say, because obviously if the Mohaka plan change coming up, and for our whānau that are on that river, major, we want the process to take us 100 years into the future, so the kōrero has to build, obviously, what our whānau wants, and we talk about Te Manawa Te Wai, but that just seems like it's going to be a blueprint for where we go forward. So if you're coming in, and then not speaking on behalf of Pahuera, but obviously the Mohaka, that lower end, they want to manage that and work through a process. And I suppose for the upper collective, because I sit on the upper collective, we want to, mountains to sea. Hey, we want something that's fit for purpose that goes from the top to the bottom. So yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Adam, is there a motion and a solution we can support for?
Oh, it's so big, Matua.
There probably isn't a motion or a solution, so to speak, on this topic of discussion now. I think this was an introduction to Nathan. He will in the future sort of probably look towards combining his report with our Wairoa Pai Whenua and Kaungunu executive, and that's a discussion that can happen up there, so we can streamline this. I think the other part is that Nathan is one of at least 10 staff that we have in our Hawke's Bay Regional Council office. He's not the only one. And he's probably a good port of call in terms of referring to the expertise that sits within that team, but also connecting back here, back to Ahuriri and to Dalton Street. So he knows what the machinery within HBRC looks like and how that works, and is a good referral point.
Charlie.
If I can add to the kōrero, I think for me it stems back to the time when the Waihi Dam overflowed and we had a lot of rubbish and silt coming down the Wairua a couple of years ago. The whole of Wairua was really bloody up in arms about what's going on, who's been keeping an eye on it, and then everyone realised that's the regional council's job. And so poor old James Rex and the previous councillor, forget who he is now, but
There's somebody watching.
come down and really got a bit of a hammering from everybody, I think, and they were calling for catchment management back then and saying we needed someone to chair the management of the Wairua catchment, and and that sort of then. Sometime later we see old bloody Nathan on the scene, and he really just started by working his way into all the marae, going to marae meetings, going to all the Māori Standing Committee meetings, because then I was the councillor at the district council, so I used to go and see Nathan there, and he was the Johnny on the spot, all right. All the Kaumātua and Queer probably all know who he is now, because they're the quickest ones to get on the phone and ring up to get things done. We have a lot of waterways that put out into to Matawa Maui, and they all block up, close up in the winter or whatever in the summer, so we need to keep those areas open in a lot of cases. There is flooding in all the back blocks. There's lots of Kopuapara always has trees in it, and Wairua really knows now that Hawke's Bay Regional Council is responsible for the waterways. They weren't that clear on it before, because they didn't even invite me to the council, to the bloody town meeting when they were electing councillors for Wairoas. No, you're the regional council, this is only for Wairua councillors. No, I'm the bloody Wairua, going for the Wairua councillor on the regional council, because they weren't really that aware of the role of the regional council. So everyone was really hammering on the council's door when it should have been hammering on the regional council. But Nathan's really gone in a big way into becoming that person, that go-to person for everybody in town, all the Māori communities anyway. So I don't know how the rest of the districts are set up, but we're quite pleased with his mahi and the team's involvement in the current scenario here. I mean, the marae people ring me up from bloody Ruatani from marae. Hey, these people have come down and cut this tree, but they've gone and buggered off. And they're ringing me up, so why don't you just ring Nathan up? But yeah, there was a good reason for that. Ring Nathan, he goes back onto them and talk to them and sorted it out.
Get things done.
So we just endorse their position, and him becoming now part of the Māori relationship team is a good move.
Madam Chair,
I mean, if he's doing a good job in solving problems up there, he's our man.
You can't have him, you can't have him much
Council does
You can't bring us some photos, you'll be all right.
So, Madam Chair, just to close up this part of our agenda, I'd ask that you welcome Nathan as part of our Māori Partnerships Group. Acknowledge that the role he has as Northern Area Manager is one of secondment for 1 year, just to see how that works. We might, it's subject really to the LTP moving forward, and of course working with Kotahi and our plan changes and freshwater reforms as to what that might look like in terms of resourcing similar to this that might perhaps service the southern part of our region. So with that, if we could receive Nathan's report.
Yes, I'm happy to move Nathan's report. Could I have a seconder? Happy. All in favour? Aye. Let's have a cup of tea.
Cool.
Thank you, Nathan.